One man. One donkey's jawbone. 1,000 enemies. Did Samson really pull off this impossible victory? Samson, betrayed and bound, stands alone against a horde of Philistine warriors. Without a weapon, he reaches for something unexpected, a donkey's jawbone. What follows is an unbelievable display of strength and divine intervention, leaving his enemies in ruin and his legend carved into history. The story of Samson is one of unparalleled strength, personal vendettas, and divine intervention. It unfolds during a time of oppression, when the Philistines, a powerful and ruthless people, ruled over Israel. For 40 years, the Israelites lived under Philistine control, suffering their rule and exploitation. They had lost their freedom and were left searching for hope amid despair. Samson was born into this era, chosen by God from birth to be a Nazirite, someone set apart for divine purposes. Unlike others, his calling was clear, to deliver Israel from Philistine oppression. However, his approach was unconventional. He did not lead an army or raise a rebellion. Instead, he single-handedly waged war against the Philistines through acts of personal retaliation. His first confrontation with the Philistines stemmed from his ill-fated marriage to a Philistine woman. After being deceived, he lashed out in fury, burning Philistine fields with foxes tied together with torches and striking down their men in his wrath. His acts of vengeance only fueled Philistine anger, making him a target. Now, at this pivotal moment, the Philistines had had enough. They would not allow one man to humiliate their people any longer. So, they mustered their forces and marched into Judah, determined to capture Samson. This was no ordinary pursuit, this was an invasion. Their hatred for Samson had reached such heights that they would wage war to bring him down. Judah, though once strong, had grown weak under Philistine rule. They had accepted oppression rather than resisting it. The Philistines demanded that Judah hand Samson over, and the men of Judah, fearing a full-scale war, chose submission over defiance. Samson had been chosen to deliver Israel from Philistine oppression, yet in a stunning act of betrayal, his own people turned against him. The men of Judah, frightened by Philistine retaliation, chose self-preservation over loyalty. Instead of rallying behind Samson, they confronted him, saying, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? Why have you done this to us?" Their words were drenched in fear and resignation. They had accepted their position as subjects under Philistine rule. Samson, unfazed, responded with the reasoning behind his actions. "As they did to me, so I have done to them." There was no apology, no remorse. He had acted in vengeance, meeting fire with fire, and he did not regret it. But Judah did not care about his justification. Their priority was avoiding Philistine wrath, even if it meant betraying their own deliverer. Determined to hand him over, the men of Judah bound Samson with 2 new ropes, a symbol of submission and imprisonment. The irony was stark. The very man called to free Israel from oppression was now bound by his own people, offered up like a sacrifice to the Philistines. Samson, outnumbered and alone, did not resist. He allowed them to bind him, and so he was led away, betrayed yet eerily calm. He knew something they did not. The men of Judah marched Samson to Lehi, where the Philistines awaited with 1,000 armed warriors. The numbers were staggering. There was no escape, no weapon, no army, only Samson, bound and surrounded. As he approached, the Philistines erupted in triumphant shouts. Their greatest enemy was finally captured, delivered into their hands without resistance. Their victory seemed absolute. But the Philistines had miscalculated one crucial fact: Samson was not defeated, only waiting. In that moment, something miraculous happened. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon Samson, flooding him with supernatural strength. The ropes around his arms became like threads before fire, snapping effortlessly as his power surged through him. Now free, his eyes scanned the battlefield. He had no sword, no spear, yet he would not remain unarmed. His eyes settled on something unexpected, a donkey's jawbone, lying discarded on the ground. It was not an ordinary weapon. In fact, it was not a weapon at all. Yet in the hands of Samson, it would become an instrument of divine victory. With the jawbone in hand, Samson charged into battle, swinging with unparalleled force. He struck one Philistine, then another, their bodies falling as if crushed by the weight of the heavens themselves. His rage, power, and divine calling fused together into a violent storm of destruction. The Philistines, once confident in their victory, now screamed in horror. Their weapons became useless, their numbers meaningless. Against one man empowered by God, they were helpless. Samson fought like a whirlwind, striking down soldier after soldier. By the time the dust settled, 1,000 Philistine warriors lay defeated. He had won. Alone, armed only with a donkey's jawbone, he had achieved the impossible. In triumph, Samson raised the jawbone, declaring, "With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey I have slain 1,000 men." His victory was not just personal, it was prophetic. He had proven that God's strength surpasses all weapons, all armies, all impossible odds. And so, the battlefield was named Ramath-Lehi, meaning Jawbone Hill, a lasting reminder of this extraordinary victory. This battle was not just another moment of revenge for Samson, it was a confirmation of his calling. Despite betrayal, overwhelming odds, and being bound, he rose in supernatural power and struck down Israel's enemies with a weapon so unlikely that it could only point to divine intervention. Through Samson's strength, God sent a clear message to Israel: he was still their deliverer. And yet, despite this victory, Samson's story was far from over. His greatest test was yet to come. Samson walked into Lehi, his hands bound by thick new ropes, his body worn but unbowed. 1,000 Philistine warriors stood before him, their weapons glinting under the midday sun. Their faces twisted in triumph, they had finally captured the man who had humiliated them time and time again. Behind Samson, the men of Judah stood in uneasy silence. They had betrayed him, handed him over to avoid war. Though they were Samson's own people, fear had led them to become pawns of the Philistines, their cowardice outweighing their loyalty. Samson remained unshaken. His strength was not just physical, it was destined, supernatural, beyond comprehension. This moment was not his end. It was his beginning. Just as the Philistines closed in, spears drawn, eager to silence their greatest enemy, something happened. A surge, a divine force, rushed over Samson like a storm unleashing its full fury. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him with overwhelming power, consuming him in a flood of strength beyond human limits. The ropes that bound his hands, strong, new, untouched, became as brittle as burned threads. They snapped and fell from his wrists, vanishing like dust caught in the wind. Samson was free. The Philistines staggered back in shock. Their cheers of victory turned to cries of alarm. They had believed that this was Samson's final moment, but in a heartbeat, everything had changed. He wasn't defeated, he was rising. 1,000 Philistine warriors, armed with swords, spears, and shields, now stood against one man. Samson glanced around. He had no weapon, no blade, no armor, not even a stone to throw. But then, his eyes locked onto an unlikely object, something discarded, insignificant, completely overlooked. A donkey's jawbone. Not a weapon. Not forged for battle. Not wielded by warriors. And yet, Samson reached down and grasped it, gripping the ancient bone with unshakable confidence. To any outsider, it was ridiculous. Who fights 1,000 warriors armed with steel, using the remains of an animal? But this was not an ordinary fight. And Samson was not an ordinary warrior. This moment was about more than strength, it was about faith. Where others saw weakness, Samson saw opportunity. Where others saw nothing, God saw victory. Then, the battle erupted. Samson charged forward, the jawbone raised high, swinging with devastating force. The first Philistine fell instantly, struck down before he could react. Then another. And another. The warriors around him hesitated, suddenly unsure. Fear bloomed where confidence once stood. Samson moved like a storm, swift, powerful, unstoppable. The jawbone, though simple, became a force beyond comprehension. It struck with precision, snapping swords, shattering bones, sending warriors crashing into the dust. The Philistines, so certain of their victory, crumbled before him. Their advantage in numbers, meaningless. Their weapons, useless. Their army, defeated. Samson fought without hesitation, without exhaustion, without fear. His strength never wavered, his grip on the jawbone never loosened. Dust rose in thick clouds, cries of terror filled the air, until 1,000 men lay dead across the battlefield. A jawbone, used by a single man, had accomplished what no army could. As the final warrior fell, the battlefield fell silent. Samson stood alone, victorious. He looked upon the chaos, upon the bodies of warriors who had once mocked him, upon the land that had witnessed an impossible feat. Then, he spoke. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey I have slain 1,000 men. His words echoed over the battlefield, not arrogance, but recognition. He had triumphed, not because of earthly might, but because of divine intervention. This was not just a fight won, this was history written. The battlefield was named Ramath-Lehi. Jawbone Hill. A lasting monument to a moment beyond comprehension. A victory that no one would forget. This was more than just a miraculous fight, it was a message. The jawbone, an object deemed worthless, became a tool for deliverance. God had chosen the unexpected. He did not require weapons, armies, or powerful leaders, he could use anything to accomplish his will. Samson, despite his flaws, recklessness, and human weakness, was chosen to deliver Israel. And in that moment, he fulfilled that calling. Against all odds, against betrayal, against the strongest enemy, he rose. Because God had given him strength. Because God had gone before him. Because this was destiny unfolding. And Samson's victory would be remembered forever. Though Samson had won, his story was not yet finished. The Philistines, though devastated, would not give up their fight against him. His greatest challenges were still ahead, his final days, his greatest betrayal, and the moment when he would make his ultimate sacrifice. But in this moment, on Ramath-Lehi, amidst the bodies of 1,000 fallen warriors, Samson stood undefeated. And though the battle ended, the lesson remained. With God, even the impossible is possible. This was not just a battle. This was proof that faith outweighs fear, proof that God's strength is greater than any weapon, proof that even the most improbable victories can be realized. One man. One jawbone. 1,000 enemies. And victory written in the dust of Ramath-Lehi. The battlefield lay silent, thick with dust and remnants of shattered Philistine weapons. The air, once filled with the shouts of warriors eager for conquest, now carried only the echoes of Samson's breath, deep, steady, unbowed. He stood alone, towering over the fallen army that had dared to rise against him. At his feet, the worn, blood-stained donkey's jawbone rested. It had been the most unlikely weapon, the simplest of tools, yet it had accomplished the impossible. Then, Samson spoke, his voice carrying over the battlefield like the final word on an epic war. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey I have slain 1,000 men. This was not mere boasting, it was a declaration, a statement that cemented his triumph into history. His words captured the shock and magnitude of what had just occurred. A single man, using nothing but a donkey's jawbone, had obliterated an army. For Samson, this was not just a personal victory, it was a moment of divine recognition. He had not fought alone, he had fought empowered by God himself. His strength was not his own, but the manifestation of a higher purpose. This was a battle that should have never been won. Yet here he stood. This was the power of God revealed through the hands of his chosen deliverer. Samson's weapon of choice was strikingly unconventional, a discarded donkey's jawbone. The Philistine soldiers had come with polished swords, sturdy shields, and iron spears. Each warrior had trained for battle, wielding weapons meant for war. Their armor gleamed, their strategy was sound, their victory seemed inevitable. Yet, all of it was useless against one man armed with a bone from a dead animal. This was no accident, nor was it mere desperation. The jawbone carried profound symbolism, showcasing God's ability to use the unexpected to achieve the miraculous. In human reasoning, a weapon of war should be crafted from steel, wielded by many, used with strategy. But in God's hands, even the most unlikely instrument could be victorious. Samson's battle was not about military superiority, it was about divine supremacy. Throughout biblical history, God used unlikely tools to accomplish great victories. David's sling and stone, not a mighty sword, but a small rock, yet it felled Goliath. Moses' staff, not an army, but a simple rod that split the Red Sea. Gideon's 300 men, a group far too small, yet they conquered Midian. The jawbone in Samson's hands, not crafted by blacksmiths, yet it shattered Philistine warriors. Samson's victory mirrored a divine pattern. God's power is not dependent on earthly strength, it transcends human logic. His triumph was not because of superior weaponry or strategy, it was because of faith and divine empowerment. For Israel, Samson's triumph at Lehi sent a powerful message. Even in the darkest moments, when the enemy seems strong, when deliverance seems impossible, God can rise up a champion from unexpected places and grant victory through the most unorthodox means. The men of Judah had surrendered to the Philistines out of fear, betraying Samson instead of standing beside him. They had lost hope. They had accepted oppression as their reality. But God had not abandoned them. He did not need a mighty army to fight back, he needed only one man, armed with his divine strength and a discarded jawbone. The jawbone became a testament to the unpredictable nature of God's deliverance, a symbol of hope, power, and God's ability to use anything for his glory. Samson stood on the battlefield, surveying the staggering aftermath of his victory. Around him, the lifeless bodies of Philistine warriors lay in heaps, 1,000 strong, a number too vast to ignore. This was not just another battlefield, this was a place marked by divine triumph. So Samson named it Ramath-Lehi, meaning Jawbone Hill. This was not merely a location, it was a memorial, a reminder of how one battle changed history. For years to come, anyone who passed through Ramath-Lehi would know what had happened there. They would remember the lone warrior, the unconventional weapon, the 1,000 Philistines who had once marched confidently toward their prey, only to fall in disgrace. Ramath-Lehi stood as a message to all who saw it. God does not need armies to win wars. He does not depend on conventional means. His strength is made perfect in weakness. The site became a legacy, a declaration, etched into the land, standing as evidence that when God moves, even the impossible bends to his will. Samson's triumph at Ramath-Lehi was not just another battle, it was one of the most legendary victories recorded in biblical history. Everything about it defied human expectations. A single man facing 1,000 warriors. No sword, no army, no battle strategy. Only a jawbone, yet total victory. It was a miracle. A moment that proved God's presence. Samson's legacy was sealed in the dust and blood of Ramath-Lehi. His name would be forever tied to that battlefield, to that unlikely weapon, to that unbelievable triumph. God uses the unexpected for victory. The jawbone was insignificant yet became powerful in God's hands. God chooses unlikely people and tools to accomplish his plans. Samson's victory came not just from physical ability, but from divine empowerment. Strength alone does not win battles, faith and purpose do. Samson named the battlefield as a reminder to all generations. Ramath-Lehi became a monument to God's power, forever recorded in history. A man once walked into battle alone and bound. When the battle was over, he stood victorious, his chains broken, his enemies fallen. A man once walked into battle alone and bound. When the battle was over, he stood victorious, his chains broken, his enemies fallen. And in his hands, the simplest of weapons, a donkey's jawbone, became the most powerful instrument of victory. This was the story of Samson at Ramath-Lehi. This was the power of God displayed on a battlefield that would never be forgotten. And though the battle ended, the lessons remain. God can use anything. God can use anyone. And with his power, no enemy is too great. Samson's astonishing victory at Ramath-Lehi stands as a timeless testament to God's power working through the most unexpected tools. His strength was never just his own, it was a divine force that turned a simple jawbone into a weapon of unstoppable triumph. This battle was more than a moment in history, it was a message. No obstacle is too great, no enemy too strong, and no circumstance too impossible when God is in the midst of it. Just like the jawbone in Samson's hands, even the most unlikely things in our lives can become instruments of victory. What does Samson's battle at Ramath-Lehi teach you about faith and perseverance? Let's discuss. Share this story, let others discover the power of trusting in divine strength. Reflect on the symbolism. What jawbone moments have shaped your life? Let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe, comment, share, and let me know your thoughts.